Okay, well, that's 6 o'clock, so I'm going to make a start. We're going to go straight in to Daniel Clarke's presentation, and Daniel's the Community Wealth Building Officer with the council. But before we do so, I just want to draw your attention to that we actually are recording this meeting. So if anybody doesn't want to be seen, I would suggest that they put their camera off now. Don't worry about your name. When and if we use your name won't appear on the screen. So it'll be anonymised, but if you're worried about actually being seen on the recording, turn your camera off. Okay.
If everybody can mute themselves as well during the presentation.
Yeah. So basically, we'll pick up the other items in a moment, but Daniel's going to give us a presentation which will run to 20 minutes or so, and then there'll be an opportunity, as usual, for people to actually ask questions, and we'll take it from there. So, Daniel, over to you.
Brilliant. Cheers, James. Just bear with me and I'll share my screen. Okay, so can we see?
That's fine. That's fine, Daniel.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So yeah, thanks for having me this evening. Hello, everybody. My name's Daniel Clarke, the Community Wealth Building Officer with Lancaster City Council. Just be talking this evening regarding our developing community wealth building programme, some of the work that I'm involved with, and potentially some of the other projects that work connected to this this agenda in the future. So to start with, just highlighting what we actually mean by community wealth building. Now, I've actually taken influence from Neil McEnroy for this section, who was the chief executive for CLES, or he was the chief executive, sorry. And he talks about community wealth building as being economic development, but he specifically talks to the origins of the term economics, which is derived from ancient Greek, essentially, and translates to household management. But the point that he's trying to get across is that within the global kind of economic system that we're in now, we've lost touch to that people-led, low-level, community-based household management approach. And what he's suggesting is that community wealth building is a much more localised approach to economic development, which is more in tune with that kind of original philosophy, I guess. But when we are looking at community wealth building and the community aspect, we're obviously talking about residents. We'll be looking at specific regions. So within Lancaster, we've obviously got the city of Lancaster, we've got Morecambe Bay and the surrounding rural regions, all posing different opportunities, different challenges. And through this working time, I'll expect that we'll probably have strategic outlooks and policies for those specific regions. And then also within those regions, we'll be looking at demographics and data around, certain demographics like young people, needs, long-term unemployed. And through that work, we'll be able to do some targeted activity in tune with community wealth building. When we're talking about wealth, we're obviously talking about economic wealth in terms of finance, job creation, wages, etc., in that kind of traditional sense. But community wealth building is overtly looking at, social capital and environmental issues as well. So it's that holistic thing really of, economic, environmental, social kind of triple bottom line, well-being approaches. For the actual building aspect, and this is some of the work that I'll be involved with, we will be looking to work with anchor institutions. So anchors are essentially large public sector or private sector institutions that are rooted in a place. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. And typically they are, the main procurers of goods and services, the main employers. And due to that, they've got significant power in terms of economic output. Also, we'll be working with businesses in this process, and I'll come to that later on. And we'll be working with the third sector, and we'll be looking to harness community empowerment through kind of grassroots, bottom-up engagement, to influence this form of economic development. I mentioned CLES earlier, and they're a national think tank. They are the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, and they have this definition essentially for community wealth building, which is that community wealth building, it's a people-centred approach to local economic development, and it redirects wealth back into the local economy and places control and benefits into the hands of local people. So that's broadly a definition that I concur with, and it's just, you know, it reiterates that thing around redirecting wealth back into economies and being people-led, essentially. So there are 5 recognised pillars of community wealth building, which provides a broad framework to actually deliver this work. The most recognised is probably progressive procurement, the top one, and that is, you know, this idea that public institutions, anchor institutions, can procure from local supply chains, local businesses, local SMEs, and through that process you retain wealth in a region, but you also look at job creation, etc., and the delivery of social value at a local level. Second pillar, which is democratic economies, or the plural ownership of the economy. That is, again, through my work, I'll be looking at growing certain business models that are more generative, such as cooperatives and social enterprises, community interest companies, things of that nature. Fair employment, the council's a real living wage employer, and we're developing a fair work charter. Again, through my work and external engagement, we'll be looking to roll that out and, you know, influence businesses in the wider economy. Fourth pillar is land and property, which is quite a challenging area really, but very important to community wealth building. And it's the idea of how anchor institutions can use their assets, use their land, use their property for more communal and social benefits. Not an area that I've been able to get in tune with much through my work at the minute, but again, as this develops and evolves, I'm sure there will be opportunity for that. And then the final pillar, sorry, is financial power. And that's the, you know, the concept of circular economies. It touches again on the idea of progressive procurement and localized wealth, but also things such as cooperative banks and things of that nature. So I think you can see from there, there's quite broad concepts connected to community wealth building, and through my work, I'll be looking to kind of address these frameworks, look at where we can amplify community wealth building. We are at an early stage of doing this, and I guess the initial 3 core focus areas are the top 3 there: progressive procurement, working with generative businesses and seeking to achieve a democratic economic approach, and then also fair employment. So I guess with all that in mind, there is, you know, a question as to why do we need community wealth building, and I do have some stats, some data here essentially. This is from the Equality Trust and ONS. So the richest fifth had an income that amounted to more, oh sorry, this data is not quite coming up, just bear with me 1 minute. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, my presentation slides weren't just quite working. But yeah, the richest fifth had an income more than 12 times the amount earned by the poorest fifth. And then wealth in Great Britain is even more unequally divided than income. In 2016, the ONS calculated that the richest 10% of households had more wealth, and the poorest 50% in contrast owned just 9% of the wealth nationally. So I'm sure we could pull up data from all different types of sources in terms of you know, wealth inequalities, and within the Morecambe Bay region and within Lancaster as well, we're well aware of these kind of structural inequalities as well. So this slide is just referring to central government policy essentially. So we've had the Levelling Up white paper recently. Further back, we had a lot of kind of talk around Build Back Better, and even further back we had the Northern Powerhouse. And I guess this slide is just kind of referring to the fact that community wealth building does align to these central government policies in terms of ideology and outputs, but also it's looking at an alternative, more grassroots, localized and independent, I guess, approach to some of these kind of economic policies that does support this national agenda, but it's also an alternative in its own right. Again, bringing this back to the local area and Lancaster and the rationale for community wealth building, and, you know, the rationale for some of the projects that we'll be looking to do in the future. We know that Morecambe Bay is the 6th most deprived and mid-sized seaside destination in England, and I think that's come from a Chris Whitty report recently. And we know that in Lancaster, there's also similar challenges in some of our rural regions as well. There are significant challenges around economic attainment, etc. So with that in mind, through my work, I will be looking to identify, priority areas in the region and look at various statistics and data based on deprivation, mobility, health and employment, and really assess what is our rationale for this kind of work and who can we partner with to address some of this, and how can that kind of collaborate and join up in terms of our community wealth building ambitions. Obviously, also within Lancaster, there are a lot of strengths and opportunities to address. So obviously there's a lot of civic pride in the region. We saw a lot in that, a lot of civic pride during the COVID pandemic. We've got a really strong and diverse third sector, which we want to support and grow. We want to harness community empowerment. We did a webinar last week with Co-ops UK to kind of talk about how cooperatives can support that agenda. We've got significant anchor institutions that we want to work with closely to collaborate and develop some ambitions towards community wealth building. The Eden project, I'm sure you saw that the planning application was approved last week, it was. And if they get the funding, I see that as being a real kind of catalyst for this kind of work, because they just align completely to community wealth building in terms of their economic, social, environmental kind of agendas and values. At an economic level, we've got the certain growth sectors in terms of the green and digital sector. We want to support that growth, but also make sure that that growth is inclusive and is, offering opportunities to all of our kind of community, essentially. So if we now just refer to what's already happening with the council itself, this is our priorities document. So the four top boxes are the kind of organisational priorities in terms of service delivery and culture. So we've got a sustainable district, an inclusive and prosperous local economy, healthy and happy communities, and a cooperative, kind and responsible council. On the left-hand side are the themes, which are essentially the main work streams to address these priorities, which is obviously the climate emergency, community wealth building and community engagement. So I guess the purpose of this slide is just to kind of reaffirm that the council is committed as an organisation to community wealth building. We're at the start of that journey really, but through my work and through partnership work, I'm sure this will evolve, and there'll be a lot more kind of tangible outcomes for this work in the future. Again, looking at what's already in place with the council and partners, we do have a progressive procurement policy, and we've achieved a 14% increase in local spend from 2019. Through my work, we will be looking to add value to that and develop that kind of piece of work. We are already working with anchor institutions collaboratively, again, very early days, but that kind of collaborative approach will evolve in the future. That'll look at things around procurement, recruitment practices, inclusivity, etc. Embedded social values, so that previous slide around our organisational priorities, I'm sure you can see that we are looking to embed social value in terms of all of our service delivery, and community wealth building is a real kind of economic agenda to align to that. Mentioned that we're a real living wage employer, which is worth celebrating. We have the climate emergency declared as a council, and that will really be embedded into the future of community wealth building as well. So I've talked about the green sector. We'll look at supporting the green sector, supporting that transition to a green economy, but doing it in a way that's inclusive. But also looking at things like the skills agenda and green skills and how that's going to provide a pathway for young people and employment potentially. Final box there is just alluding to the fact that we already are doing quite a significant amount of community engagement, which will feed into my work. We've had conversations around this idea of a Lancaster deal on other platforms such as the Community Conversations Group. And essentially that's just looking at this idea of aligning, community priorities and needs to service provision with the council and other partners. So these are all things that are being developed. So with all this in mind, I'm now at the stage of kind of articulating the vision for community wealth building in broad terms and looking at some more tangible objectives and measurements that we can do as a council and with partners. So I guess the broad vision really at this stage is just looking at how we can apply the principles of community wealth building for a localised, resilient and inclusive economy, and really look at that social, economic, environmental well-being approach. That's really what I'm looking at. But again, through partnership work, we'll be able to look at collaborative approaches to some specific objectives, which hopefully we'll be able to progress in the near future. With the, that overall broad vision, I'm now in the process of more kind of specific delivery plans. This first stage, essentially the first 12 months, really is looking at a gap analysis in terms of strengths, opportunities within the region, looking to raise awareness around the community wealth building agenda with partners, with stakeholders such as yourselves and with the community. And going back to that rationale earlier, looking at the, the baseline data and sort of the target groups that we might look to kind of support, and who's going to be the recipients of community wealth building. That's all going to inform our delivery plans. Second stage, really going back to that framework of community wealth building and the 5 pillars, we will be looking at to identify the opportunities to actually amplify community wealth building within that framework. And as this evolves, the delivery plan will look to tie into our our corporate goals, the capabilities and the resources that we've got, so that they are realistic within the actual capabilities of the council at this moment in time. So I guess it's important to state as well that my role sits within economic development and business support, and a central focus to this will be looking to encourage and grow business engagement. So obviously promote the values of community wealth building and principles to businesses so they can potentially adopt them themselves, but also look to grow business engagement through different methods, with the idea of addressing, progressive procurement, support for supply chains, supporting the tender process, what do we mean by social value, this kind of stuff, so that when we do have our progressive procurement policy, we're also supporting businesses so they can actually be successful in the tender process so we can achieve that retained wealth. Talked about the green sector, so we will be looking at market making and also, cooperatives and generative businesses and support for those enterprises. We will be looking at sector growth and how, sectors that are growing within the economy, how we can utilize that growth for community wealth building goals, and that'll touch on, touch into apprenticeships and skills and opportunities essentially for people in employment. And I guess all of that business engagements within that framework of economic well-being as well. We're not just simply looking at economic growth, we're looking at that holistic picture through community wealth building. So the potential impacts of this work, I'm going to refer now to Preston as a real kind of significant community wealth building local authority. We are obviously looking to develop our own model for Lancaster. Preston has got a bigger economy. So, some of their successes may be slightly different to what we can achieve. But essentially, since 2013, over 70 million has been redirected back into the Preston economy, and 200 million has been redirected into the Lancashire economy. So that just shows, the power of progressive procurement through anchor institutions. And over 40 organisations are now signed up as real living wage employers at Preston Council. So you can see some of those kind of measurable economic benefits to this kind of work, but also I'd like to think that there will be significant kind of cultural, ideological and place-based benefits that could evolve over a long period of time. So I guess, what does this all mean for you and stakeholders? We are looking to collaborate and partner with stakeholders to add value to this work. We're looking to raise awareness, touched on democratic processes. I'm sure there's going to be opportunities for this organisation and other stakeholders to get involved with this evolving work. It is important to state that you'll see from the presentation that these are quite long-term, big objectives essentially, but we will be looking at shorter and medium, more tangible objectives that I'll be developing through that delivery plan. But again, there's going to be opportunities for stakeholders to get involved with that, I'd like to think. Place-based representation as well is really important for this work, and we want to make sure that this work truly is place-based and we represent community groups, businesses, stakeholders, etc. And then that final box is just touching on support. So we are looking to support organisations, but also if you're interested in this, there's going to be opportunities to get involved and support this growing agenda, I'd like to think. Yeah, and this is just the final slide. If you did want to get involved, that's a link. That link isn't actually ready yet. I need to stress that should be ready in spring, but we are finalising a community wealth building webpage, basically, which will sit on our business support and economic web pages. Potentially have a newsletter, and that'll be a platform for further engagement, news sharing, etc., events, all that kind of stuff. If you wanted to learn more about the principles of community wealth building, I'd probably forward you to Claire's, because they've got a wealth of information that's really kind of useful to understand more of what's happening across the country, essentially, with community wealth building. And finally, that's my email address. If you just wanted to get in touch directly with me, I'm more than happy to take emails and pick things up and forward it into other aspects of the council if needs be. Well, that's it for me. So I'll end the presentation and stop sharing.
Right, thanks for that, Daniel. That was very good, very expansive. And I've got to say, it's a pity that the people who organised the co-op seminar earlier in the week didn't give you more time. That was a much better presentation than one that you gave earlier in the week, but that was due to the time you had given. Right, okay, we've got Howard. Howard.
Well, a number of questions, really. One, I assume we're talking about the entire district of Lancaster City.
Absolutely, yeah. So, yeah.
Rural, industrial, whatever, and wealth development, as well as the obvious towns of Carnforth and Morecambe. So, therefore, does that involve community engagement with, we've mentioned the Canal Quarter, what about the Frontierland site, for example, or some of the buildings that are in the City Council portfolio that some people don't realise? For example, Regent Road Co-op is City Council owned, has been for many years. I believe there is some scheme taking place there with that one. But I mean, there are other buildings around the city that are just sitting there empty, unused and so on.
Yeah, so is the Regent Road Co-op, is that the one that you're referring to, the co-op building in Morecambe?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a real example of community wealth building. You're right that is a council-owned building, and it's being developed for communal use by the Good Things Collective. Well, your first question around the region of Lancaster, absolutely, yes. So as a council, we serve the entire region, which includes the city, Morecambe Bay, and some of the more rural regions, which is a challenge in itself for this work because it's so broad and so many different challenges and opportunities within those regions. But yes, that is the intention. And that broader kind of comment and question around utilising land and property across the region is important to the the intentions and the values of community wealth building. But at this stage, I've got to be honest, that pillar of land and property has not been something that I've been able to get too involved with. Primarily, it's been more community engagement and business engagement for some of them economic outputs around progressive procurement, generative business models. But James mentioned Becky and our housing strategy. Essentially, I am aware of community-led housing initiatives, and in time, through this kind of engagement, hopefully we can engage with housing initiatives and community-led housing, or provide some kind of feedback to James as to why it might not be feasible at a certain point in time. But yeah, essentially yes to your question around the district.
Yeah. So, excuse me, for example, the Frontierland site, I mean, I hear people saying, oh, it's going to be a big car park. Others say, oh, it's all going to be housing. What is it going to be? Do we have any idea what the council are thinking of, and does that involve you?
It doesn't involve me, no. So I couldn't really answer the question, unfortunately. So you'd probably have to go into planning policy, I think, if you wanted to try and direct some questions.
Yeah, right.
Sorry about that, but it's inevitable. Somebody turns up from the council, you're just going to get thrown with.
No, don't worry. I'll answer it as best I can.
Well, I only asked that because of this community wealth building. Because
I'm not being critical. I'm just saying it's inevitable. If somebody comes from the council, we'll ask questions. Any other questions from any of your observations? Right. Well, I've got another one, Daniel, if I might, and that is in your presentation. You referred to the Lancaster deal. Now, I think I sort of understand what that means, but I'm not entirely sure. Do you like to say a little bit more about what you've got in mind there?
Yeah, so the community conversations platform that we've had, it's been articulated on that platform from the CCG, and they're looking at, health determinants essentially, and, community well-being as an aspect of being a health determinant. And they've taken influence from Wigan Local Authority, and essentially what they did was do a significant community consultation engagement piece, and through that they would create a number of set objectives from the community around recycling. So an agreement between the community and the local authority. So if the community say that we will recycle our waste as advised, and then the council will do what it can to make sure that the bin collection service runs as well as it could be.
Right.
Just this kind of alignment of community wants and needs and priorities, and then the council as well. And the intention is to bring the local authority and the community closer together in decision-making processes, and the intention of the region.
So presumably that'd be a cross-authority initiative, not just you, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. So again, I'm taking influence here from the CCG who communicated this, but through our partnership approach, it will tie into the council.
Okay, that's helpful. I just want to make sure. Right, Richard's got a question.
Yes, I've probably got entirely the wrong idea of community wealth building. I'm afraid economic wealth building, providing jobs, employment, and expanding the city centre appeals to me. And I think one thing that we're missing out on here in Lancaster is the history of Lancaster City itself. The castle is probably one of the oldest and probably most important buildings, historic buildings in England, and yet it gets far less visitors than many other castles. And if we look around above the shops, the whole of Lancaster has, sort of Georgian and other features, and we've got other buildings such as Judges' Landings and so forth, which should be used. Will you be working with the publicity department? All we need here, we don't need new buildings, new development or anything. All we need is to attract people to come and see the ones that we've got, and then that will expand jobs enormously, because the number of people coming means there will be, they will need feeding, they will need cleaning, they will need places to stay. They will go into the city centre and develop what is, now we were worried was becoming more of a rundown city centre with possibilities of every type of shop, cafe and souvenir business, etc. So I'm wondering if that's something that would fit and that Daniel would be interested in looking into with the publicity department.
Yeah, Richard, completely agree in terms of, the visitor economy and the heritage and the tourism factor within Lancaster City is kind of essential for economic development and growth, basically. So we do have a tourism heritage support service within economic development. The economic development strategy would the community wealth building approach would tie into our community economic development strategy, and that aspect of heritage, tourism, visitor economy would be a really important feature to that. So yeah, there will be crossovers in our work, but I totally agree that the heritage of the city should play an important part of our economic development strategy.
Okay, any other questions or comments somebody wants to make? No, Richard, Daniel, thank you so much for that. I mean, that was a great presentation. Oh, sorry, Howard wants to come in again. Yeah, sorry, Howard.
Well, it was just a rather cheeky question, maybe. What communication does anyone ever have with the Duchy of Lancaster? Because, I mean, whilst we have got this wonderful castle, it isn't owned by us. We've got and we can't really influence it other than planning permission given or not given.
Yeah, I'll try and answer that question, Howard, rather than landing that one on Daniel, because Civic Society has had some issues with that in the past, because we've struggled to actually get updates from the Duchy about what they're actually going to do. And you're absolutely right. I mean, they own the castle, they dictate the policy. But I think the point that Richard was making is that even though the council's not owned by the local authority. It's a real asset for the community, particularly in tourism and the visitor economy. And it was really about how we could actually all collaborate together. Right, so Daniel, just to repeat what I said earlier, thank you for a really interesting.
Thank you. Just as informative for me, that last section as well, so thank you.
And responding to some quite difficult questions. I would ask you again just to think about what we could do to help you. And please don't be bashful at that, because the worst you could say is no, we can't do it. You might very well say yes, we can do it. And then the other thing I was going to say is I think it'd be really good, Daniel, if you could maybe come back to us in about 12 months' time. We'll wish to have you back again, and you can just tell us how it's actually panned out, what the successes are. I'm being positive here, and how it's moved forward. So thank you again for a very interesting presentation. You're very welcome to stay, or you get other stuff to go. We won't be upset if you go, but thank you.
Sure, no, I'll stick around, thank you.
Right. Okay, right, thank you for that. Right, so I'm going to go back to the start, and the first item is apologies. We've got a number. We've had apologies from Roger Franklin, Howard and Liz Feather, and Roger Franklin. Okay, so we've got 3 sets of apologies. The minutes have been circulated and they're in front of you. Unless anybody screams otherwise, I'm going to assume that they're a true record of proceedings. Nobody's shouting at me, so I'm going to take it you're happy with those. I've not got any matters arising that aren't on the agenda. Has anybody got any matters they want to raise under the minutes? I'm going to take that as a no. So we then move on to community transport strategy. And you'll recall that at previous discussion, we agreed that there had been a lot of work done in transport, a lot of work with statutory agencies, but it all tended to be on specific items of transport policy. So there was consultations on the city centre movement strategy, new access road to the motorway and so on and so forth. We took a view that actually it'd be really good to try and develop a cohesive strategy, but done from a community perspective. So we agreed we'd actually set up a working group to try and actually push the statutory agencies. We're not going to write this thing because we can't really, but to actually try and influence the statutory agencies. So we sent out a number of invites with the first meeting. I'm going to ask David. David, can you just give us a bit of an overview about what happened at that first meeting and where we're going to how we're going to take it forward?
Yeah, I think basically what we did was we created a document which listed pretty well all of the problems that we saw altogether across the board. So instead of just say, and one of the problems I think that's happened with Lancaster is, for sake of argument, there's been congestion at one particular corner. So somebody has looked at and said, we'll divert the traffic round the corner from that, and not looked at the overall situation of what's percolated on from that. So what we've tried to do is do an overview of the whole transport situation across the area in all modes. So we're talking about the roads, we're talking about parking, we're talking about rail, and we're even talking about the cycles. An interesting aspect came out that we've built all these cycleways. We're encouraging people to cycle around, yet my son and his family decided to cycle in and look at the castle. And as they walked up to the castle gates, they were told, you can't bring those in here. You know, they said, oh, okay, fine, where can we put them? I said, well, not in here. And well, what do we do with them? Well, do what you like with them, but you can't bring them in here. And that's the tourist attitude of the city council in reality, promoting cycling, but keep cycling through, don't stop. You're not really wanted. So all of these things all together, we put a document out. We had about 16 people on the call, a complete range of people, and they all put in their views of the problems that they see in their specific areas, such as trains, or where they lived, such as rural areas with buses. And I think where we've got to now, we're going to put together a synopsis of what that meeting was, what happened, what transpired, and we're going to try and put that out now as a document and as a press release, because what we want to try and do is encourage more people to become involved, so that we can then create subcommittees to look at particular aspects, HS2, electrification of the railway line into Morecambe, so we can get people who are with specific interest looking at it, but also people that are interested in that area as well. But we want to attract more people onto it. And I think, you know, that should be out within the next few days, and should be out on social media and out on a press release to try and attract more people in. And then we were meeting again in about 6 weeks' time to take that forward. I think that pretty well sums it up there now.
Thanks for that, Dave. Has anybody any questions to David or me or John or Richard, who were also at the meeting, about transport?
Yes, I have, and I was not invited to the meeting, even though I was appointed to the committee, as I've been on the transport committee since from the dot.
David, do you want to, because I thought we'd invited everybody who'd actually emailed you.
Yeah, everything we've put out, and everybody who said that they'd like to be involved all received an email. So yeah, did you send me an email asking to be involved?
No, I was at the meeting and I said it at the meeting.
Yeah, well, let's look, Brian. Okay, you get
the vision meeting.
Brian, you weren't invited. That was our oversight. You will be invited to future ones. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Nope. Okay. Well, let's move on then. So, projects update. The first one is South Lancaster housing, and as everybody probably knows, that started out as Belridge Garden Village, but last year morphed into something much more significant. The substantive thing I wanted to report on was that we now learn that work on the area action plan for South Lancaster has started. And that's important. That will be a statutory planning document, and it will be subject to public consultation. And we understand there is going to be a public consultation exercise run later this year. We don't have the dates for that yet. I'm hoping it will be in the spring or the summer. But we will certainly be positioning ourselves to make comments on that, because the whole sort of South Lancaster housing initiative has generated a great deal of interest from a wide range of parties. And the fact that this is a statutory document gives us yet another opportunity to have our say on that. Apart from that, there's nothing else I wanted to report on South Lancaster. Is there anything else somebody wanted to raise or ask? No. Canal Quarter. Well, again, that's gone very quiet. We understand that the City Council have appointed consultants to do the next stage of the master planning exercise. But as yet, we haven't heard anything about that. We haven't been invited to any meetings. There's been no consultation on that. So we're hoping that there will be a consultation exercise on that for the next stage at some stage. Has anybody else heard anything about what's happening in Canal Quarter?
It's a consultation document on the City Council website, and it has been for the last few days, week.
All right, I'll have a look at that. I've not spotted that, Brian. Thank you for that. Right. Okay. I'll have a look at that. I know that what they've done, because I've been invited to a workshop running towards the end of this month. So I knew about that, but as I say, I'll have a look at the strategy document that they've posted. Anything else anybody wants to say about Canal Quarter? No? Okay. Eden North. Well, again, there is big news there that they've approved the planning application. But I think we shouldn't be complacent about this, because for this to happen, it needs 75 million of central government funding. So we're just hoping that the council are going to make good on their, the government are going to make good on their levelling up commitment, because we can see no better way of actually spending government money on levelling up than actually providing the gap funding necessary for this project. Is there anybody else that wants to say anything or comment on that? David?
Only just a quick comment that Boris was in Lancashire a few days ago, and somebody asked him the question about the funding for Eden Project, and he didn't appear to know anything at all about it.
Oh, nice.
Why doesn't that surprise me, David? Yeah, well, David Morris has been sort of all over the media, hasn't he? Sort of saying he's been getting to see the Prime Minister and you know, and is open to a show. But I mean, on a serious point, I mean, that is an oven-ready project. It's ready to rock and roll. It's got planning consent. If they can't find a way of funding that, I really think that the discussion about levelling up is ill-founded. It really is. So for me, that's a bit of a credibility test. They don't fund that. I think there's some serious questions to be answered on. And I think David Morris will be in a sticky wicket if they don't fund it either. But we shall see. Okay, so we'll need to watch that one with interest. I haven't put an AOB on it, but I do have it. I'm going to put AOB because something I wanted to raise. And it was interesting during the course of Daniel's presentation, there were a couple of questions about tourism and the lack of an effective approach. I'm trying to be diplomatic in my language here. And Sarah posted something in the chat room about wanting to get involved. Now I've explained we've made an approach to the council. We've not yet had a response, but is this something people would like to get involved in? Because it seems to me that there could be a possibility of us doing something on the tourism front, similar to what we've done on the transport front. I don't know if anybody's got a view on that. Sarah, you're indicating?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
oh, sorry, I've had to come in on my phone, so I'm not quite sure how to work it. Yeah, it's when Richard was talking, it's something that it really resonated with me. It's something that I've been thinking about for quite a long time, and partly why I joined this meeting really in the Civic Society, because I'm really passionate about the history of Lancaster, and I just feel that it's not being used to its full potential or anywhere near its full potential. So I'd really be interested in working with anybody that wants to get involved in raising the profile and doing something.
Excellent. You might regret making that offer.
Probably will.
So we've got you indicating. Sorry, Sue, are you on mute? I think you're on mute, Sue, because we can see you but can't hear you.
Is that all right now?
Hear you now.
Just to say that several of us, me and Jenny Eden included, worked on various of these consultation arrangements in the past. And so I suppose we've got a fair amount of stuff in our files about what's been done and what hasn't been done. So I would be interested as well as if something gets going, and so might Jenny. So, you know, count me in. And can I just say, totally unrelated, I'm going to have to go in a minute because I've got to go to another meeting. But anyway.
Will you do a notes, Sue, of what we've been talking
I've done notes so far. If there's anything else that comes on the AOB,
okay, so
right.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Sue. Love to see you.
What I'm going to suggest, we've got Sarah and we've got Sue indicating they'd like to get involved in something. Anybody else who's here tonight that would be interested?
Oh, we'll have a whirl on it, yeah.
So we've got John, right? We've got David, right? So, what we're going to do, what I'm going to suggest we do is we have a further exploratory meeting by Zoom, right? What I think we should do, David, is we should set that up, but we should put something out to everybody, say, look, we're going to have this meeting with such and such a date. If you'd like to get involved, drop me an email, right? And we'll send you a link. That way we'll make sure we don't miss anybody off the list. In that meeting, I think we could have an initial discussion about how we might do this, how realistic it is, what we need to do, and so on and so forth, because I think we need to take this outside the normal meeting. And then what we'll do is we'll come back to next month's meeting and report back on the discussions and tell you what we're proposing to do and see what you guys think about it, and we'll take it from there. Is that an acceptable way forward? Right, so nobody's shouting no, so I'm going to assume that is acceptable.
You got away with it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other issues that anybody wants to raise? Howard?
Well, just following on from Daniel's conversation about and other conversation, Richard, as well, about the whole history of Lancaster and the buildings and so on.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really grateful that this canal quarter in its original concept has not materialized.
Yeah.
Because there's no point in this wonderful historic town becoming another Preston or another Kendal. If people want to go fancy shopping, then those are the places to go. What I'd love to see is working with the business investment district and the city council and property owners, developing these wonderful Georgian and other period properties into niche shopping, which would be Lancaster's an ideal thing for doing that, an ideal city in every way, with the marketplaces and all that kind of thing. The only problem is, of course, is the transport in and out of the city with the roads.
That's right.
But of course, if we ever got that other bridge over the river, that would solve a lot of problems, wouldn't it?
I mean, I think that's a really good point. John, I'm going to ask you to come in on that, because as a past chairman of the chamber and having a detailed knowledge of the bid and having done a lot of these things in the past, I just wonder if you might want to comment on Howard's observation.
Well, Lancaster does have a reasonable selection of specialist small shops. There is always scope to improve on those. And, you know, if you go to York, you've got a good, as an example, there's a good mix there of specialist shopping and large stores. They've got the best of both worlds. The bid is defined by an area. You know, it has a border, and businesses within that bid district are the ones who make the contributions to the funding of the bid. So unless the bid was willing to look at expanding its area, it wouldn't be too interested in helping develop properties into retail units. I think one of the biggest issues we've got with buildings is this fixation that developers have in this city of providing student accommodation. And the returns on their investment are better than they will get from creating small retail units. You know, we've been trying to get the planning department to be brave and say no to some of these developments. And the only no that we've had recently, which Hugh sent an email out today, was a retail application. The reasons it's been declined are obvious, but you know, it just seems ironic that they've declined a retail application and yet they're happily agreeing student accommodation left, right, and centre.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about that is the two universities and city council and private landlords are apparently supposed to be working together to have no more than a certain percentage of students in different districts of the city.
Yeah,
is one thing. I mean, the other thing, and I'm trying to push this for Morecambe, that in the West End development, for example, there were distinct corner shops built. But then, of course, as tourism developed in the 20th century, a lot of what were guest houses became a front room shop with the family living above. Now the family doesn't live above. We don't know who lives above. Some of them are empty, some are derelict or multi-occupancy. And I think what would be really good, and that will be also relevant for Lancaster, is to put back the housing where it was originally housing. There's a good example of that opposite where the cinema used to be, next to the chemist. I've forgotten the name of the house there, but they've put back the original windows there. So it is just a house again. And I think that will be, you know, if we don't want any more fancy shops or little ones or artisan or whatever, then let's make them back into housing so people are living in the city centre and not just students.
I think that's a really good point, Howard, but I just want to go back to one of the things that John said. And it was about the bid. And I'm just wondering, John, whether it might be an idea to try and get the bid to do a presentation to Lancaster Vision at some stage, because I think it would just be useful to hear what they're doing and also it would give colleagues an opportunity to put. But do you think they'd be up for that, John?
Well, we can always ask Tony. He's the bid manager.
Right.
The worry I have about the bid, and I look at all their promotions, they all seem to be focused on the small retail shops. And yet the contributions to the bid funding, the majority of it comes from the big shops. You know, it's the Boots and the Marks and Spencers and the like who make the major contributions to the bid funding. Yeah. But when they do the promotions, they tend to be ignored.
Yeah. And I think but that's just not a Lancaster thing. I've seen that with bids I've been involved in elsewhere in the country. It's a fairly generic thing, that. And but I agree with you, it's regrettable.
But we should be talking to the bid, and yes, let's invite them to come and talk to us.
That might be useful. Right, is there any other issues anybody wants to raise?
James, Hermione seems to have had her hand up for some time. I don't know if it's an accident.
Sorry, who's got the hand up? I can't see it. Sorry, who's got hand up, Richard, did you say?
Hermione.
Hermione, are you? Not that, yeah. No, I can't see a hand. Can other people see a hand?
No, I can't.
No, there aren't on, but Hermione's on.
She is muted, but
there's a mute, it's not a hand. So nothing's forthcoming from that quarter, so I assume not. Okay, so that brings us to 7 o'clock, so that's not bad in terms of time. Our next meeting is 7th of March. So in the meantime, we'll have a discussion about tourism, and we'll report back to you on that at the next meeting. Okay, thank you all for coming, and I'll see you next month.